Aloha and welcome to the Carroll Cox Show, Bittersweet News. I'm your host, Carroll Cox. Wanted to talk with you and share with you some things that we've recently learned. You know, there's this big whoop-de-doo going on about Red Hill, where Red Hill has about 20 tanks at about 200 feet or some outrageous, and it was one of the possibly eighth, ninth wonders of the world. And these tanks are contained inside the mountain there at Red Hill here on Oahu. One of them leaked, as you remember, recently, and it's been in the news for at least for the 14th of January of last year, 2014. The Navy came out and admitted that they've had a spill or leak, and then someone attempted to retract that and say, well, it's really not a leak, with maybe a bad reading. So we really don't know the truth. But what we can tell you is that earlier incidents substantially threatens the drinking water aquifer that is located in that area underneath these tanks. And this area serves a large portion of the island of Oahu. Now, we're all up on the hill. Our legislators, we've had legislator Tulsi Gabbard to go and visit and view in their hard hats. We've had her father, Mike Gabbard, to go up there, and there's an entourage, and other state representatives and lawmakers have gone up on a show and tell. And I even think that the Navy League and the representative Bob McDermott has gone up to the area, you know, parading, show and tell. So while we're all focusing up on the hill, I want to bring you back down to earth for a moment. And I want to share with you something that I have recently found through reading and researching, because I believe that the threat that the presence of this oil poses to the people and the environment in this state is astronomically high as far as the risk factor. We don't know the cancers, we don't know the illnesses, we don't know the deformities. We know nothing because there's no real studies, because if they're not admitting that there were leaks and all of that and spills and malfunctioning of the pumps and the pipes and the breakage, we really wouldn't know. There wouldn't be a reason to do any studies of human health, right? But something that through all of this research of mine, we've learned that there at Pearl Harbor, which relies on the Red Hill system for fuel and storage. And mind you now, I want to tread lightly and not give you the impression that I don't believe or support the military and the military actions. We have a strong military, and to man that and keep it fueled and going, we must have fuel storage sites, all of those things. But we don't want to do it in such a fashion while expecting the enemy to come and to prevent the enemy from taking us over. We kill ourselves through cancers and illnesses and sicknesses and poison ourselves, something similar to throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We don't want to do that because we're smarter. Now, we hear that they barely will admit that there are spills at Red Hill, but we've documented that many functions associated with, or activities associated with Red Hill we've found oily pits that were burning oil and dumping. They used to dump oil straight into the lava stream, waste oil. They used to burn it. We can take you to a site, and we have taken you to a site on TV where there's oil bubbling out of the ground in state property right now in Halava. But something just revealed itself through our research. While we're on the hill at Red Hill, with the legislators, and they're having their whining and dining, or whatever you do when you got a big name and you've been voted in office and you're looking out for the peeps. What we found is that downgrade at Pearl Harbor, we found in documents that there are 13 plumes of substances, petroleum byproducts, and solvents at various plumes. They can't quantify each plume in the volume, or at least they haven't been able to tell the public. But we do know one thing. One of them, they do know the volume. And that volume is, for one plume that's under the ground at Pearl Harbor, is a whopping 5 million gallons that lays underground on top of the saltwater basal lens and poses a risk to the environment forever. 5 million gallons. While uphill they're telling you, and our legislators are running around being guided and lied to and being told it's too expensive to repair. It's too expensive to double line the tanks. It's too expensive. In the meantime, in 2007, we have a spill that took place some approximately 359,000 gallons out of tank 48 that is located on Pearl Harbor, situated near Cam Highway. And over the shoulder here, you will see they're installing a trench, a pipe, to collect some of the materials that are migrating and underground and moving. So keep your eye on this. There'll be a couple of pictures there, and you'll see tank 48. But 360,000 gallons. Over my shoulder here is an aerial shot, and if you can look right here, these are the tanks. Tank 48 is one of those tanks. So when you look at that, 359,000 gallons leak from that. This is what they're estimating. That added to the 5 million. Now, some of you familiar with the Valdez, the ship that ran aground off the Alaskan coast. This is half of that just in the one plume, but there are 13 plumes. And they are called, it's in the Halava main gate area. That's what they refer to it. And the remedial action areas, RAAs, again, there's 13 of them. Each one may have 1 million gallons, could have 3 million gallons. But because of the nature and the characteristics of this, they can't quantify it. Because of the substrate, because of the soil underneath, or what have you, and all of those things. And some of these materials have wedded themselves or bled in with others. And in turn, they have a situation where now, as an example, this is a letter, and I apologize, I've had a son of an itchy throat, so we have a little bit of cough drop, but we're not here to put on a show. I just want to share with you information, so I do apologize for the distraction. But here's a letter, September 24th, 2012. And this letter is basically based on the conditions of the Tank 48 site, the potential environmental hazards and consensus from the DOH and the Navy action is consistent with Hawaii administrative rules. The Navy's action is also consistent with appropriate DOH guidance presented for preference. Now, they go on to say Tank 48 is an above ground storage tank. You see the ones at Red Hill are underground. So there's above ground at Pearl Harbor, and the fuel drains down from Red Hill in some of these instances and refuel or replenish, or they sucked up there and they're held in reserve. We don't know the understanding, don't care to know. All we know that is that the fuel is there, a byproduct, and that some of them are escaping through pipes and holes and pipes, malfunctions or what have you, or seepage. But give you an idea, that yellow spot there, tank 48 was drained 1,248,000 gallons were drained out. And a hole this size, a 1.5 by 3 inch hole, was found in the sump area. And that is where the fuel drained from. Tank 48 is an above ground storage tank located in the NAVSUP Fleet Logistics Center Upper Tank Farm within the Halava Main Gate Geographic Survey. Now, this area is under the EPA's watchful eye, but we have not found a single document that is public that speaks to the total volume of free agents that are floating under the ground that have contaminated our waters and contaminated our groundwaters there at Pearl Harbor. And this poses a great risk for eternity because it will seep out. So we hear reports of sheens, fugitive sheens that are drifting offshore or what have you. Could this be one of the sources? We have explanations on occasion that it is the Arizona, it is the sunken ships that are bubbling and giving off fuel or diesel. That may be true, but they're not telling us that this material that we see could be migrating down. And when we say migrating, it's the viscosity that dictates, and the substrate and a few other conditions that will dictate how this stuff moves. And they estimate it's moving about a foot or something to that degree back and forth. But it's being blocked by barrows that protect the old fish walls or the fish ponds and what have you. So it goes on to say that the Tank 48 is approximately 600 feet from the shoreline of Pearl Harbor Magazine Lock, at the western edge of the site between North Road and Kamehameha Highway. At the time of the release, the tank held 1,248,000 gallons of diesel and fuel marine. After the fuel remaining tank was removed, 28 April 2007, a hole was found. 359,000 gallons, they say, were estimated. Now, that's disturbing. And then several historical product releases from various tanks within the upper tank farm occurred between World War II and the 2007 Tank 48 release. Approximately, it states, 5 million gallons of this product remain in the subsurface in the upper tank farm area prior to the 2007 Tank 48 release. Imagine that. That's just in one area in Pearl Harbor. There's 12 other sites, 13 total. This is unacceptable. We're told that we can trust them and that it's not contaminating the drinking water of the aquifer up at Red Hill. But here's the problem. If you have 13 sites that have historically been present at Pearl Harbor and you can't get rid of it because you don't have the technology or the substrate or the environment prevents it or you don't have the money, why should we continue to take a risk? Why should we continue to take a risk and leave those tanks situated at Red Hill as they are now? We need to take extreme measures, and even with assurances that they're not going to leak, that we're monitoring them, once the cat's out of the bag, and the cat's already out of the bag because they know they're detecting in some of the monitoring wells some chemicals or solid waste or heavy metals associated, or TPHs or naphthalene, methylethyl naphthalene, and all of various materials in some of the water up there. But they say it hadn't been detected in the drinking water yet. But if you can't manage 13 plumes, and mind you, I didn't mention to you that one of those plumes is solvent. What is the volume of the solvent? And the viscosity of that. And bunker C fuel oil is there at 2, they suspect. But it also talks about the 2 at 48, tank 48, has mixed with some other and created a hybridized plume. And they know these things because they can fingerprint the fuel and tell what is what. But should we trust this? Is this something that we should continue to allow? And our legislators, local and federal, Ms. Hirano, Mr. Takai, and Ms. Gabbard, we need some involvement, some action. We need some immediate response to address the Red Hill issue for the sake of preserving the conditions of the drinking water. If we can't do that, we need people like Senator Schatz. We don't need another photo opportunity where our legislators come and parade up and then come back and say we met with the Navy and with the Air Force and all. We need to understand something. The military is exempt in many of these rules. It's about time that the military, when you look at their track record, and they claim to be stewards of the environment, and I beg to differ. If you have 13 plumes since World War II, and you can't quantify them, and you don't know what they are and where they are, and you can't manage them, and you can't extract the materials, something's terribly wrong. I don't believe that in the interest of protecting the country that you should allow the military to operate in a fashion that exempt them from certain laws, such as the underground storage tanks or the above ground storage tanks or the piping area. Now, I don't want to impede the process of serving the country and having a strong military. Don't want to suggest that. But the reality is, this is our home. Hawaii is part of the environment. We cannot afford, simply cannot afford this practice any further. I believe that our national legislators and our state legislators should push to have the rules changed so that if we could be assured that we will exempt the military from these rules, environmental rules that protect human health and the environment, if we could be assured that the militaries take and go to great length to protect the environment and the health and welfare of the people, and not to be as careless as it appears with one spill after the other, not informing the public, we're really not gaining anything. We might keep the enemy from coming here, but the reality is the enemy probably wouldn't find any benefit to being here if we are all dying of cancer. I mean, it sounds facetious, but enough is enough is enough. And I think we as a people in this state deserve better. We don't need any more parades of going to the Red Hill tunnels as if it's a day in the picnic park or a day, an excursion for our legislators or those that are specially invited. I myself, an environmentalist, one who's always concerned and looking at these issues, I don't get invited to these sites. And I appreciate not being invited because I don't want to be part of the chorus, that chorus that dons on a robe and a hard hat and goes up and sing the song that, well, we're looking at it. That's going to be a #1 seller eventually. We're looking at it. The military is looking at it in a fashion that their gates are closed. They can hide behind the curtains that there are national security interests. But do we want another Love Canal? Do we want another Camp Lejeune? Do we want anything like that? Well, unfortunately, I'm here to tell you it's probably, we're already there. And the only reason that we're not spoken as in the same level as Love Canal or Camp Lejeune or some other contaminated site is that here our legislators and others won't hold the military's feet to the fire. And the EPA is as complicit as all get up. They may write fancy documents and they may write fancy rules and they may have the shiniest gold badge, but let me tell you, it's not worth 25 cents when you learn how most of this information is kept from the public. Most of this information is not disseminated to the public in any form or fashion, and when it is, it may be through a restoration advisory board, but that's only an advisory board. And you still are not bound because as long as it's an active military site, and some of these are F1, some portions of them, like you take, for example, Blaisdell Park. Many of you don't know that Blaisdell Park is one of the really a contaminated site too. It was part of the military complex in Pearl Harbor. They stored their drums there, the chemicals and the PCBs that are in the soil. Now, mind you, in some areas they're not as high, but Blaisdell Park. So Hawaii has the practice is noted for being very forgiving, apparently, because we take Makalapa, as we've talked on other shows, Makalapa Elementary, Radford High School, Makalapa Crater was an active military dump site for old munitions and anything associated with munitions or ordnances, jeeps and solvents, and they burn trash here. And there's PCBs and dioxins and furans in there, and they cited a school on it and was given in 1963. So was Blaisdell. The city took part of Blaisdell. But this entire complex, Pearl Harbor. So that's why you see signs posted, do not eat the fish. They'll tell you some of the fish are certain species are okay. But when we step back and look at the entire process and what is really going on here in Hawaii, on the island of Oahu, just speaking of Oahu now at Pearl Harbor, we have some serious issues. Again, 13 plumes called remedial action areas have materials or contaminants that have escaped or leaked or intentionally dumped that are in subsurface soil that is mixed with the groundwater, is influenced by the tidal flow or the tidal movement, and no one has heard anything publicly, a public statement from. Now, mind you, they did in 2007 of April, did make a small release, public release information, and it was printed in the newspaper, that there was a leak occurring at Tank 48, 2007. But there's been no open discussion. But I would think 5 million gallons of a plume warrants a public discussion, full disclosure, equal or surpassing the discussion and the time and attendance given to Red Hill. And I believe that Red Hill is part of a ruse. Not to say that it's not leaking, but isn't it nice to have everyone mulling over Red Hill and what should they do? Should they double line it? It's common sense. It threatens our drinking water. one of the main drinking water sources on the island. So there shouldn't be a debate about that. But I believe, and I'm suspect of everyone now involved in this process, but I truly believe, and I'll express it publicly, that it's a distraction. We have the laundromat in our air, the site that was the Navy site for TCEs. There's a plume of contaminants there, solvents or cleaning fluids. Then we have 13 remedial action areas at Pearl Harbor. And they're the Halava Gate area. And when we see this, we know that there's something wrong. So why not have the discussion at Red Hill? Why not have our legislators talk to us and tell us we're looking at it at the Red Hill? But something's gone very wrong, seriously wrong, when our legislators haven't spoken a word that right here, right in the immediate area of the ocean where people fish, recreate, swim, and rely, and we transport ourselves using this water. And no one has said, not a single legislator has said, and there's a task force, mind you, that was formed to deal with the Red Hill leak. But no task force of legislators to deal with the 5 million gallons of bunker C fuel that is underground in the subsurface soils that are in the groundwater. 5 million gallons. They have not spoken about the 12 other remedial areas that has plumes that may exceed or be less, and some of them may be less, but they can't quantify. So I say to our legislators, get on the ball, get with it, and fix it. So I'm your host, Carroll Cox. Thank you for joining me on Bittersweet News. Aloha.